Fadeout, a Dave Brandstetter mystery, Book 1, author Joseph Hansen, publisher, University of Wisconsin Press, Terrace Books, 1970, narrator Eric Aust. Preface. When the late Joan Kahn, magisterial mystery editor at Harper & Row, accepted this novel for publication, she wrote my agent, "Where has this writer been hiding?" I had to laugh to keep from crying. Hiding was the last thing I'd wanted to do. The year was 1969. I was 46 years old, and I'd been writing all my life. The New Yorker and other good magazines had printed a few of my poems, but that was it, so far as big-time publishing went. The tattered typescript of a gay novel I called Valley Boy, after years of traveling, had ended up in 1964 with a dodgy paperback publisher in Fresno, crept into backstreet bookshops as Lost on Twilight Road, and earned me, as I recollect, $200. After years of struggle, the law courts had, by the mid-60s, decided the First Amendment gave writers the freedom to write, printers to print, booksellers to sell, and readers to read pretty much whatever could be put into words. And as blind chance would have it, this meant my time had come. Not that I wrote or wanted to write pornography, but in the best American tradition, shady operators all over the country saw the chance to make a fast buck and became publishers. And since these dimwits saw homosexuality as in and of itself pornographic, I was ironically in luck. In my own bailiwick, the San Fernando Valley in San Diego, once stodgy old printing plants, began churning out erotica by the ton. They couldn't find fodder enough to feed the hoppers. I'm not a fast worker, but I did my best, gamely adding the sex scenes the editors insisted on. I had serious things to say about what it meant to be homosexual in our world and time, but if this was the only way I could get them into print, then so be it. Before Joan Kahn plucked me out of hiding, the porn peddlers had published 6 of my novels and a book of short stories. She was a redoubtable lady, but I can't really imagine her marching into trashy Times Square bookstores to comb the shelves for undiscovered writing talent. Anyway, I'd called myself James Colton then. When Don Slater, who edited one of America's first openly sold gay magazine, started printing my stories in the prudish 1950s, he had insisted I use a pen name for my own protection. James Colton stories kept appearing in the magazine, and when it came time for my novels, it seemed good sense to keep the name. In time, I became an editor at One, and one bright morning I tore open an envelope from New York that held a poem. One Sunday, which was far better than the stuff commonly sent to us. The writer was Leo Skur, and after we joyfully accepted his poem, he sent us more wonderful stuff. Wistful, funny verses, stories, reports of gay life on Fire Island. Leo and I began writing letters back and forth. He read my work and changed my life. This he did by schlepping my books to the office of Seligman and Collier, his New York agents dumping them on Oscar Collier's desk and urging him excitedly to read them. Excitedly was Leo's style. I knew nothing about his visit until Oscar rang my phone from 3,000 miles away, introducing himself in a gentle southern drawl, and asked if I had anything he could sell for me. I sent him 3 typescripts, a period romantic thriller, a genre called Gothic at the time, and crowding the supermarket paperback racks, a half-finished story of an unhappy seaside summer affair between a male illustrator of children's books and a teenage neighbor boy, and the book you hold in your hand. Oscar sold the Gothic Tarn house to Avon Books the day he got my package, and within a week nailed down a contract for Guard, the book I was working on. This was dizzying. I'd mailed Tarn House to half a dozen publishers, and they'd all rejected it. As for Guard, none of the schlock publishers who did my stuff would advance money on an unfinished novel. But when I queried Oscar about Fadeout, he canceled patience that one would take a little longer. I sighed. He didn't know how long it had already taken. I had finished writing it at the end of 1967 and felt it was the best work I'd ever done. Of course, it had no sex scenes in it, but oddly, my usual editors didn't cite this as their excuse for turning it down. One of them, Earl Kemp of Greenleaf Classics, told me it was too good for his list. Yvonne McManus at Brandon House, who had published my first venture into crime fiction known Homosexual, said Fadeout deserved better. Every place I took it to shied away. It was a book many praised but none would publish. West Coast literary agents are a ragtag lot, not good for much. A friend of mine acting in a Broadway show found me an East Coast agent with a famous name, but who turned out to be old and ailing, stowing manuscripts under her bed at Martha's Vineyard and sending them nowhere. So I took a deep breath and settled down to the dreary routine of mailing the manuscript out to publishers, waiting weeks for a rejection, bundling it up, and toting it back to the post office for another futile round trip. This ate up 18 months, during which, with John Harris, I ran a walk-in poetry workshop in Venice Beach. But together with Don Slater, a new gay magazine, Tangents, demonstrated against the Vietnam War, taught myself guitar, painted pictures, and kept on writing novels because I didn't know how to stop, and because, though the pulp peddlers paid badly, they did pay. Whenever one of us sold a book, a Falstaffian friend, John Kimbrough, and I would celebrate with martinis, lobster, brandy, and cigars at a rambling old Sea Cliff restaurant called The Point. Kimbrough picked up the check more often than I. It was his own fault. He wrote faster. I don't remember how long I waited to hear from Oscar Collier about Fadeout, no more than a few weeks, I think, but I'm sure it seemed longer. Agents hate for writers to pester them, and I tried to act grown up and reasonable. It wasn't easy. Then one Monday morning, when I was the only one at home, the phone rang in the sunny kitchen. It was Oscar with the good news. I had hit the big time at last. I wasn't just a porno hack with delusions, after all. This book, Oscar said strictly, I must publish under my own name. Grinning like an idiot, hands shaking with excitement, one after another I dialed the numbers of everyone I knew. No one answered. They were all someplace else. The whole world seemed to be someplace else when the book came out. The New Yorker gave it a good review, and I suppose there were others. Though a butterfly was part of the cover art, the book did not wing its way out of the shops. When I had sat down to write it, an old awareness was nagging me, that gay men already knew what I had to tell them. How could I reach straight readers, introduce them to those strangers they'd cross the street to avoid meeting all their lives, by putting them into the kind of story that keeps readers turning pages? And nothing does that better than a detective novel, and that's what I wrote. But mystery readers don't take to change. They crave the mixture as before. They trust that anything new they have to mull over for a long time. When Bantam issued its mass-market paperback edition, it sold no better than had the hardcover. I thought my experiment had failed and hunkered down at my typewriter to rattle out books for the market I knew and that knew me. My hopes were for dreamers, kids, to avoid grief and penury. In future, I would stick to what I could count on. This was only buck fever. Panic after I'd written 3 more James Colton books. I worked up my nerve to take another grab at the brass ring. Death Claims sold better than Fadeout had. Troublemaker, in its turn, attracted a British publisher for all 3 Dave Brandstetter books. French, Dutch, German, Italian, even Japanese translations followed. What was wrong with this picture was that while my income was now inching above the poverty line and my unapologetic look at homosexuals was out there, the booming U.S. paperback industry had taken against mystery novels. Agatha Christie and Earl Stanley Gardner were at your corner drugstore, but almost no one else. It's a different story today, when mysteries climb the bestseller list like kudzu vines. 30 years ago, hardcover sales were modest, and the sums they earned meager. Without paperback reprints, and for a lucky few sales to movies and television, the writer of detective fiction had to find a day job or live on peanut butter sandwiches. I'd had enough of both things. I'd also had enough of reaching so few readers. I needed a miracle. It was a long time coming. Then, among the endless, gaudy aisles of the 1979 American Booksellers Association powwow in the sprawling Los Angeles Convention Center, when I finally stumbled upon the booth of my then publisher Holt, a bright and eager youngster called Steve Dorsky, shook my hand and said He'd just come on aboard as marketing director, and would I please get the rights to all the Brandstetter books back. Now, yesterday, if published, Holt wanted to publish them in paperback right away. For the next 12 years, Fadeout and the rest of the Dave Brandstetter mysteries sold steadily in paperback. New ones added as I wrote them, and no titles slipping out of print. Not only did this mean new readers every day were turning my pages to find out who done it, but that along the way they were getting my message that homosexuals were pretty much like everyone else in this world, living as best they could with their share of joy and sorrow, success and failure, love and loss. It doesn't sound like a startling message, does it? Yet no other mystery writer had passed it along before me. Gradually, times changed. At my back, a line began to form of new writers with gay detectives, male and female. However, perhaps typically for a man of 80, I'm doubtful about the future. Have books got one? Because, and this began some years back, when fans at public gatherings ask me if any of my work has been made into movies, and I tell them no, their smiles fade, and they wander off in search of a real writer to talk to. Americans don't take you seriously if your work hasn't made it to the Cineplex. And then onto TV. I have had my brushes with showbiz, option money from time to time, promises like the camel in the adage CBS television once put its head into my tent, then came into the tent, so I had to get out. A French film producer in the 1980s optioned Fadeout 3 times for bigger and bigger sums. Alas, her business manager then embezzled all her money and ran off with her secretary. No movie. But as a book, Fadeout has proved durable. Not that dismal artifact, a classic which Mark Twain defined as a book no one reads. These days, if no one is reading it, chances are a book goes out of print and stays that way. How many publishers has Fadeout had? I've lost count. In its 34 years, it has always been in print somewhere. People keep reading it. The old standard German translation was recently recrafted for a new edition in France. When Gallimard first published Fadeout in 1971, they timidly cut 4 chapters in fear of the censors. In 2001 came a new translation with the cuts restored, an event judged by Le Monde as meriting a front-page review. Most writers hope their work will outlast them. I'm no different. So it is gratifying that the University of Wisconsin Press had decided to give Fadeout a place on its list. Universities have a solidity few other American institutions enjoy. Certainly not book publishers, and I now have the luxury of dreaming that once my little life is rounded with a sleep, Dave Brandstetter will go on engaging the imagination of doomed generations of readers long after his once startling sexual bent has ceased to unsettle anyone. Joseph Hansen, Laguna Beach, California, February 2004. Gay Mysteries audiobooks. I think it is easy to hate a label, but a face humanizes the word. So this effort is twofold: to offer comfort to those like myself that your world didn't end because you don't fit into the view of acceptable society on both sides, and in hopes of helping those with family that are LGBTQ, that it doesn't mean we are aliens from the child they once knew. Reassure them so they can maybe be supportive at the same time, being true to their values.